My presentation is probably going to be a little bit more fluffier than Courtney's. It's really just to kind of wet your whistle a little bit as to what functional MRI is. I'm not going to give you a how to do it or exactly how it works and stuff like that, so it's supposed to be a little bit fun. So, what are people thinking? So, for different professions, I found a couple of these just to break up my presentation. So, for a paramedic, I found this one amusing, that their mum thinks that they're just sleeping in a hospital. I thought it was also interesting that what they think and then what they actually do were two different things, but I'm sure that they feel that they transport the same patients numerous times. Okay, so MRI, I know most of you have a brief knowledge of this. So during an MRI, protons in your brain align with the magnetic field that is in the machine. They're temporarily then knocked out of alignment by radio wave pulse. As they relax back to realign with the magnetic field, they emit radio waves of their own, which is what the computer picks up and creates the MRI image of, because all of your different molecules in your body have different relaxation times and they're looking at the difference of that. So that's pretty much all that I'm saying on MRI. So functional MRI relies on two facts about the body: that blood contains iron and that it rushes to parts of the brain that are stimulated. As this occurs, it distorts the magnetic field enough for the computer to be able to pick it up. So it gives you these little readings. So they're using an MRI machine. The blood flow is monitored as it increases and decreases in certain areas as the patient is given stimuli. These can be in the form of images, touch, sounds, even smells, to see how their brain is going to react. Researchers have hypothesized that this is brain activity, this is thought. Some skeptics are thinking that blood flow may not mean anything. But they're using the technology to make inferences as to how the human brain works. I personally think that it is. I mean, if you think about how muscles work and stuff like that, blood flow tends to mean that it's doing something. So if the neurons are needing more blood, you can assume that they're doing something. So the blood oxygen level dependent of the Bold effect is what they're actually looking at. When neurons are active, they need more oxygen, logically, so you can assume that oxygen levels would then decrease as cells use this oxygen. However, there is a slight initial drop of oxygenated blood. However, to compensate for this, there is a larger increase in perfusion. So venous oxygenation actually increases, and then the deoxygenation decreases in the venous blood. So you can see from this little slide here, so when your neurons aren't doing anything in your resting state, yeah, they're still getting their blood, which is good, your brain's still active. But then when you're actually thinking, the overall blood flow does increase. So the deoxygenated blood is actually the blood that has the paramagnetic properties. So that's actually what the functional MRI is looking at. As the stimulus changes, the signal increases and decreases. The variation in this blood effect is really small. It's probably only less than 2%. But then you've got to think X-rays that incident onto an X-ray plate is only about, 1.8 or something of the beam is making it through the patient onto the plate. So you can do a lot with a little with computers these days. So they're using really advanced statistical maths to be able to identify the variations that are being caused by the stimulus in the brain. So with this maths, they then can create either like the overlays that you can see in my nice slide on the thing on the side here. So you've got your anatomical MR brain, and then you've got your information over the top, or you can do the 3D reconstructions, which is kind of in the bottom here, and all your different planes. And so that's actually from a functional MRI analysis software. So that's kind of how the images look like when you're creating them. So what are your advantages? Obviously most of the advantages are the same as MR. It's not invasive, there's no radiation, you get the same spatial and temporal resolution of MR, which is really good, and it's easy for the researchers to use as long as the patient's staying still, which is always the challenge. So the paradigm or the stimulus that is being used, as I said before, it can range from all numerous things, sounds, smells, anything that can trigger a response in the brain. So the activities are repeated several times, and they can have rest periods in between to have the brain go back to base and then give them another activity. So all of these combined together is called the paradigm. So obviously the same as like in a CT, you've got your microphones and your headphones to go. You've got these, I can imagine, would be quite a pretty penny to have some MRI compatible screens and projectors. But typically what they do, if they don't want to spend the money for this, is they can have like the projector outside, like so through the window, so like in CT projecting into the tunnel, and the people look at it with their coils over their heads with their little mirrors. That's how they see their images. And then obviously you have your response pads to, if they're asking them a yes/no question, and see those reactions. Okay, so this is an example of some of the stimuli that you could possibly be asked. Now this first one I won't go the whole way through because it kind of has a corruption at the end. And there is no sound on this computer. Excellent. Well, what that one is asking there is to ask for a word that relates to this sentence. So, the man in uniform that delivers your mail. And then, what is the opposite of east? And so, it doesn't actually tell you those answers, but it's looking at like what are the links. So, your hearing link, and then where the answer is in your brain and what highlights with stuff like that. The next one down, so your category-based semantic verbal fluency task, I didn't quite understand. It was like, think of the as many words as possible to go within this category. Vegetables. And then take a break, take a pause. And it's like, well, okay, millions, excellent, tick. Then the motor function areas, they basically just spend the first like 5 seconds going, don't move anything else of your body, stay completely still, particularly don't move your head, only move the part of the body that we want you to move. Right foot. And then, okay, pause, relax. So it's quite basic, it's not, that difficult to come across. So that's your stimulus. Okay. So, on to the next section, so we'll have a little break. I really liked the bottom one, what the government thinks I do. Or society, just self playing some golf. Okay. So, how's it being used in hospitals and what good would it do? So neurosurgery for problems like tumours or epilepsy can obviously put people's primary brain functions such as walking and talking and stuff like that in jeopardy because you want to take out the tumour or the diseased or damaged brain with good clear margins, but you obviously don't really want to be taking anything that's going to harm that person, otherwise you're doing more harm than good. So at present the technique used to map where important regions are is quite invasive, and it only really gives like a general location of what's going on in there. So using functional MRI you can be more specific as the locations of specific things are slightly different for people. So this is talking about, so with language you have like links. So you're looking for pattern and links. So I'll give you an example with the next one. So they give you like a paradigm such as this. So a list of words like bed, rest, awake, and beep, weep, heap, and ask you to think of a related word. What would we say?
Sleep.
Yep. So looking at that, so it's got your hearing centers all active, and you're thinking about that, and then it's your link as to where your brain's holding that word sleep and how that's working. That if you lose that, that's when you have struggle with your language. So it's showing those things. So the end goal with this research is that a patient can spend an hour having a functional MRI, and the surgeon can preserve as much of their primary brain function as possible, because it will have an exact, like, okay, in this particular patient, this is exactly where and how they use their language center. So we should be able to try and save as much of that as we can. Okay, So then after a traumatic or anoxic brain injury, the definitions between coma, vegetative state and minimally conscious state are challenging to define. The latter is particularly important, so the minimal conscious state, as the patient can show some self-awareness and environmental awareness, even if it's only intermittent. So looking at this is really good to be able to see how that's happening and what's firing and stuff like that. So they did some study on some patients that were completely in vegetative state, so they had no response bedside. They asked them to imagine two different scenarios. The first playing tennis, the second walking into their house. So they should trigger quite different reactions in a normal person's brain. So in one individual, the response areas of her brain were completely the same as a normal healthy person, even though she was completely in a vegetative state. So she was thinking of those things, even though she couldn't respond in any way with any communication. So out of the 54 that they examined, 5 were able to willfully modulate their brain activity. So I mean that's something. One gentleman was able, couldn't do anything bedside, complete vegetative state, but he was able to voluntarily do these 2 different scenarios, and they could use them for him to say yes and no to different situations. So this method could further be used to allow patients to sample simple questions like, how is your pain level? Living wills and stuff like that. Who should be in control of your care? If you can have some kind of communication with a patient like this, that's a huge step forward. They're also looking at the resting state functional MRI, which is different. It doesn't have any of the paradigm or anything like that in there. So this is just looking at spontaneously what is happening in your brain. There is a default network of activity that they have established. So there is a baseline that this is what a normal human brain is doing when it's doing nothing. And they have also shown that this does decrease as the individual's mental capacity decrease. So they have a baseline. If it's less than that, they can see that there is less brain activity. It's more of a confirmation of brain dead, I would assume. It also can be used, so once you have a baseline, so say you have had a traumatic event and you have come out with some neurological deficits, there are some tasks and rehabilitations that people can do. So they have a baseline functional MRI, and then they go and do of their rehabilitations and their tasks, and slowly, they're getting improvement. And they can actually show with a functional MRI that the brain activity is actually increasing. So they are being able to use more of their brain. So it's not that the one bit that they were using before is getting better. They are actually branching out and using the rest of it. Let's get into some of the stuff that's to do with us. Now, I have to say, I have never seen a radiologist sitting on Facebook. Have seen some real estate sites when I've walked in, but never Facebook. But maybe as the younger generation comes through, we might see some of those. And sometimes I would like them to yell at emergency a little bit more. And we all know society thinks that that's what radiologists do, because, number of times that we get called radiologists. Okay, so research applications. So this side is really just fun. What are people doing with this? This one I thought was a little bit interesting. You can train your brain to be happy. Using a functional MRI, the brains of monks. That's it. Yeah. So the monks that spend up to 50 hours meditating were scanned and found that they have increased activity in the region of the brain associated with joy. So technically they're more happy. But you don't have to spend all of your waking moments meditating. Even the control group that they were just beginning meditation, they sure saw increase during the experiment. So yeah, it pays to stop and do nothing for a little bit. So, although you can train your brain to be happy, it does make a difference if you're a glass half full or half empty kind of person.
Half full of wine would be great.
Yeah, that's it. So after taking a psychological test to determine which subjects were naturally positive or negative, They showed the patients images while they were in the functional MRI that were positive or negative. In the study, I think it was like puppies and ice cream and like cemeteries and needles and stuff like that. And it showed that those people that were more positively inclined reacted more strongly. There was more activity in their brain when they saw the positive images, and vice versa. If you were more negatively inclined, you had more activity when the cemetery popped up. But never fear, because the negative inclined can obviously be trained. So with this functional MRI, if you can see the feedback of what your brain is actually doing, you can actually stop these thoughts and think about other things. So the researchers are hoping with this, with the feedback, to help people that have unwanted thoughts, such as, suicidal tendencies, depression, schizophrenia. If they can see that in their brain that's where their thoughts are coming from, that they should be able to trigger them to go into a positive area. So that's what they're hoping with that one. We'll see how it all plays out, but it's really interesting to know that there is power of the mind, and you can have some... Ryan Gosling can help to cure Alzheimer's, of course. I don't think any of us are surprised. Researchers have found that looking at famous faces creates a flurry in one of the areas of the brains that is first affected by Alzheimer's. So they're hoping that detecting a lack or decrease of activity in this area will signify of early Alzheimer's. And obviously with any disease, the earlier you catch things, the more that, there's treatments and exercises and things that you can do to, if not stop it, to slow it down. So they're hoping that they'll be able to look at some Ryan Goslings and figure that out.
Some different reasons for the increased activity in the brain.
So dyslexia is a fairly common affliction and comes in many degrees of severity. Using functional MRI, researchers scanned two groups of kids, those that read well and those that read below average. The kids that read well showed activity in their occipital temporal region. The kids that were below average showed more varied activity, so it wasn't really in that area that should typically be active. So they went and did this fast forward language, which is attempting to rewire the dyslexic kids' brains to help improve their reading, because dyslexia is about, as we said earlier, language and like the pattern and the links and stuff like that. So dyslexia is just not being as skilled in that area. So they got this program to these kids for like 100 minutes a day. I did have a link on there, but the video's not all that flash. So it's pretty much just like video games. It comes up and it's bright and it's interactive, and they're like, click on the red square and then on the yellow square, and it gets faster. So they start with very simple instructions like that, and then they start talking faster and the instructions get more complex so that their links start to get more activated. So once they're done this, they're 100 minutes a day. Surprisingly, the brains showed activity in the occipital temporal region, the same as the kids that could read before. So there is improvement. They did improve those links and started using their memory and their brain correctly. Well, not anyway. The kids, they also continue to use the other areas as well. The other areas they inferred they were using to compensate for this deficit, but now they could use it all. And researchers have also trained a couple of dogs attempting to answer the questions, what are dogs actually thinking? So 2 dogs have been trained. This is a picture of a 3-year-old border collie, Mackenzie. And it's showing that the dogs pay close attention to the hand signals of their owners, and the same area in a human brain that responds to like a reward is responding in the dogs when they're signaled that they're going to have a treat. So it's showing that there is some similarities there, because the dogs are the oldest domestic animal that we have. The researchers here are a little bit like, how much have we influenced them and have they influenced us, because they've been our pets for like 10,000 years or something. evolving. So how is our evolution going together? In the long run, the researchers are hoping to ask, do dogs know when their owners are happy or sad? If some of you are dog people, you kind of put your emotions onto them and think that they know what's going on. And so they're thinking about how much language do they really understand. So it's very widely technology being used out there for a lot of different things. So what do people think about us? I really liked the end one, what I really do. I feel like I do that a little bit in CT. What button am I pushing again? But yeah. So yeah, and I also wanted to end on that note. If our brains were simple enough to understand them, we'd be so simple that we couldn't. So although they are getting into here and they're trying to figure out how we think and what we think, there will always be individuals that just think that little bit different. So I don't think we'll ever completely get there. Okay. Was there any questions? No? Excellent.
Who is that Ian?
What was that?
Who is that Ian?
I don't know. I follow I Love Science Facebook thread, and it just pops up with fun things, and this came up. I was like, oh, I like that.
Is that a geologist I met?